Welcome to the build guide for my latest Grim Dawn build, the Ice Gunslinger Infiltrator. When I say latest build, I really mean first build, as this is the second character I've ever leveled up to 100, and the first character that's been able to conquer ultimate for me. With that said, this build doesn't require much gear and is very new player friendly, only making use of one 3-piece blue set that isn't completely even necessary, with any good gear that complements our build with damage or survivability added on. I've been making my progress through ultimate with this build while doing some farming for gear, materials, and iron bits. He's currently just starting Act 6 with just a little bit of struggle, but with much room for gear improvements that will eventually lead him to destroying ultimate difficulty. My goals for this character include defeating both expansions on ultimate, completing all of the roguelike dungeons on ultimate, and then finding what other hard endgame content I can then do, and I wish to let you join me on that journey, so let's get started. The main idea behind this build is to be able to dish out cold damage from range with the capability to freeze any enemies that might get too close. We picked a Nightblade class for our main ability, Amarasta's Blade Burst, and a lot of the cold damage complementing abilities with strong defensive choices. We then pick Inquisitor, making this build an Infiltrator mainly to pick up ranged expertise, allowing us to dual wield pistols without using an item slot, and some extra cold damage abilities and auras that the class has available. This build is a really strong starter build, like I mentioned. It's technically my first build to progress through ultimate difficulty, so I have very limited gear and supplies myself, but I'm still able to shred through acts 1 to 3 with currently just a little bit of struggle onwards, but room for gear improvements. Grim Eternal's DPS numbers average around 300k, but has peaked at 410k while killing the Hive Queen, which seems to be more than enough damage for the current content that I'm doing. For extra defensive layers, we make use of dodge and deflect chance with about 35% base, going up to 65% chance to dodge under item effect procs. We also make use of many self-healing mechanics and the ability to generally just freeze most mobs that come near us. The chance-based dodge system can be an issue if you happen to be unlucky while fighting a heavy-hitting mob. You do have a chance of being one-shot, but that chance can be minimized with just good positioning and better gear overall. And generally, I'm really happy with where this build is doing its current content. It isn't complete gear-wise, but we're still able to go through ultimate without much problem using some of the compromises we make with gear that I will go over during the gearing section. As I've mentioned, Amarasta's Blade Burst is our main skill and bread and butter for this build, so we max this and the Lethal Assault passive as soon as we can. Blade Burst is a really solid low cooldown ability that we can unleash every 1.5 seconds with our current cooldown reduction, dealing some nice cold damage at long range with a decent area of effect and a chance to freeze targets hit. The Lethal Assault passive will add some flat cold damage and give you a powerful damage and offensive ability buff for 4 seconds that you'll have up 100% of the time while fighting. The second most important skill for this build is the Ranged Expertise passive in the Inquisitor skill tree. We use this mainly to give us the ability to dual wield pistols with 1 point, which saves us an item slot, and then we max it for the attack speed and damage. The pierce damage isn't really wasted here because we have some pierce to cold conversion on gear and a little bit of pierce scaling elsewhere. The next main skill we use isn't actually from the skill tree, but it's a component. The skill is Brutal Slam from the Severed Claw component. This can seem like a bit of an odd choice since it is a physical skill, but we're really just using it for its weapon damage. The reason we're using Brutal Slam is that we need a shortish cooldown powerful single target ability, and Brutal Slam matches that need very well and can be used from long range. Dealing 330% of each weapon's damage with a plus 50% crit damage is insane, especially with how high our crit chance can get against most monsters. I'm not too sure if there's a better option than this ability for this build since I haven't looked too deeply into it, but Brutal Slam has been helping me deal with some nice single target damage. The next skill we have maxed out is Rune of Hagarid. This skill is pretty similar to Traps in Path of Exile, but it takes 1.5 seconds to arm, which can make it pretty tough to use correctly. I usually just use this skill to deal with some stronger packs or as extra burst damage and reduction to defensive ability to high health monsters. I didn't even plan on using this ability during the initial part of this build, but after seeing all of the plus levels I have on it from my gear, I decided I might as well make use of it. And then I realized that the Biting Cold passive can reduce defensive ability by over 300, which is an insane amount that lets me get a lot more critical strikes in long fights. As mentioned, we want to have Rune of Hagarid and Biting Cold maxed, but we only get Chill Surge to level 15 to unlock the 4th extra projectile. I would consider points spent above level 15 on Chill Surge to be wasted since they won't give you any extra projectiles, which is the main purpose of this passive, and the extra Frostburn damage isn't really that worth it when compared to anything else that you can spend your points on. Another active damaging ability that we use is Ring of Steel with the Ring of Frost Transmute. We only put 1 point into this because we are really just using it for the freeze, and the damage Ring of Steel deals with only 1 point isn't all that bad, especially when we add some of the item modifiers that we are using. Just use Ring of Steel whenever mobs get too close to freeze them and make a quick escape, or just as an extra damage skill to your rotation. In the background footage, you're probably noticing me teleporting around, and that's an ability called Disorder that you get from a crafted item that you put on your metal. I'll go into how you get this in more detail during the gearing section, but basically for the version that I'm using, you need to find a blueprint from a random drop, but you can buy a slightly weaker version from the Cult of Drakes faction shop in the Forgotten Gods expansion. We use Disorder as a general mobility skill to get around faster or to escape from dangerous areas. We put 1 point into Blade Barrier because it's just too good as a 1 pointer to not have on your build. If you don't know what Blade Barrier does, it basically just makes you immune to damage but unable to move for 3 seconds while giving you a big health regen buff. I use this skill as a last resort when I'm in a tough situation, and it works very well for stalling to wait for cooldowns to come up or to just completely negate some heavy hitting attacks. With 1 point in this skill, it is on a 35-second cooldown, so you do want to be careful not to use this ability too often so you can save it for when you really need it. The last real activated skill that we use is Pneumatic Burst for the burst heal that the base skill gives us, but mostly for the powerful passive bonuses it offers. We only put 1 point in the skill itself because while the healing is nice, it's not really the main purpose of the skill for us. The main purpose of the skill is the Shadow Dance passive, which we max out for 20% chance to dodge and nearly 100 defensive ability, making us a lot more survivable. Elemental Awakening is pretty good too, and I've just been spending my leftover points that I have nothing else to put on it since it's not too important, but at the same time does offer a nice little damage boost. As for the mechanics of Pneumatic Burst, it has a 10-second cooldown, but the passive buffs that it gives actually last 24 seconds, which allows you to have the passive up 100% of the time as long as you use this skill every 24 seconds. The defensive bonuses that this skill gives us is one of the main layers of defense, so it is a really important skill for this build. We max out Phantasmal Armor mostly for the flat armor, which applies to all of our armor pieces, and reduced CC duration. The Pierce Resist is a nice bonus that helps cap out our resist, and the Energy Absorption and Leech has barely been noticeable to me, but it's a fairly simple passive that lets us survive a lot more content. Chilling Rounds is a passive that we only put 1 point into because our gear gives us at least +6 levels, which is enough to get it at a 20% chance to proc on attack. The main purpose of this skill is the freezing and the extra damage on attacks. With only 20% chance to proc, it isn't really reliable, but we can't go wrong with only spending 1 point on it since it does come in handy every now and then. The final passive we'll look at before going into auras is Deadly Aim. Deadly Aim is a really nice 1-pointer passive for damage with the flat damage buff and % offensive ability it offers if you're able to get a critical strike. We want all the offensive ability we can get with this build because of all the crit damage that we're stacking. Now we can talk about our auras, and we're currently running 2 of them. The first and most important damage buff we have is the Aura of Conviction from the Inquisitor tree. This aura gives us an insane damage boost to Pierce, which we're converting to Cold, and a really nice damage boost to elemental damage over time, which buffs some of our devotion skills and some of our main skills as well. Remember that Aura of Conviction is an exclusive skill, and you can only be running 1 of these at a time. The next aura is also very important, and it is the Veil of Shadow from the Nightblade tree. We have this skill and the Night's Chill passive completely maxed out. The base skill gives us a really nice defensive boost by reducing the speed and offensive ability of mobs around me, making it much easier to dodge attacks. And the Night's Chill passive gives us some really good offensive bonuses by reducing the cold resist of mobs by over 30% and even doing a little bit of passive cold damage over time around me. In Ultimate, mobs can reach above 90% cold resist, so any method of resistance shredding that you can get is going to really help your damage. As for attribute points, I personally like to spend most in Physique until I'm able to get it just above 1k, and then the rest in Spirit to give us extra damage and energy regen. You might need to spend some points in Cunning to equip your weapons, depending on what gear you're currently wearing. The devotion tree is really big and has a lot of options, so I haven't exactly mastered it yet, but after going through a few iterations, I believe that I have the devotion tree at a good spot right now. If you feel like you have better ideas for devotion points or just want a different playstyle, then by all means go for it, it's all up to you. The first thing that I rushed in my devotion skill tree is Rowan's Crown for the extra elemental damage and the elemental storm ability that we put on our main skill Amarasta's Blade Burst. The damage over time synergizes with some items and passives we have, and the resistance shredding is a really nice mechanic to boost our damage. To unlock Rowan's Crown, I finished the Spider constellation for some generic stats, and the Harpy constellation for extra cold and pierce damage to get the colors that I need for Rowan's Crown. The next big damage boosting constellation I got was Hydra, which only requires 3 more red points, which I grabbed from the Vulture constellation. The Hydra gives us a ton of extra flat damage percentage to all damage and some offensive ability, making it super efficient for our build. The final big damage oriented constellation we get is the Leviathan, which gives us a ton of extra cold damage and unlocks the Whirlpool ability that we put on Brutal Slam to deal a lot of damage in an area, especially when we're able to freeze mobs in that area to keep them there. Leviathan requires a lot of purple and green points, so to get those I completed Quill, Owl, and Hydra constellations. The Behemoth constellation is one of our defensive layers since it gives us a lot of extra health and the chance on taking damage to heal a ton of health and give a boost to our health regen for 10 seconds. We don't actually complete the Behemoth constellation because our points can be better spent elsewhere and we don't really need the constellation points that it gives upon completion. We need 4 more blue points to unlock Behemoth, and we use both Sailor's Guide and Eel to get more than enough blue for that. The last thing I spent my 4 extra points on was partially completing the Ghoul constellation to get some much needed life leech that would be saving my life many times over. Like I said, any iterations on this devotion tree will probably work for you depending on what your playstyle and preferences are, but I believe that the Hydra and the Leviathan are 2 very important constellations for this build, and it'll really suffer without either of them. As I've mentioned before, the gearing process of this build isn't complete and I've had to make a lot of compromises with what I had available to me. In the gearing section, I'm going to be going through all of the items starting from most important and moving to least important, mentioning what replacements you can make along the way if you don't have these items available. After we go through each gear slot, I will then talk about components and augments. The first gear slot I'm going to go over is the weapon. In the best case scenario, you'll be dual wielding 2 mythical Haggardian enforcers. I personally only have 1 mythical and 1 empowered equipped at the moment. I believe that this gun is the best in slot for this build with its stats and plus levels to every skill that we make use of. Not even mentioning the Spines of Haggarad skill that it gives us that can be very powerful. If you don't have 2 Haggardians enforcers, a good stepping stone is the Frigid Barrel of the Relentless North epic pistol. Obviously not nearly as good, but still giving you the right stats that you need until you can get a best in slot. If you don't have either of these weapons I've mentioned, then searching for a decent rare pistol with the stats that you're looking for will probably bring you through elite difficulty. The next most important step to gearing is actually going to be the 3 different gear slots, and those are the helmet, chest, and shoulder, having the Silver Sentinel epic set equipped and all. This set isn't too rare to get since it is only an epic 3-piece set, and after doing some research I believe that this may just be the best in slot set even though it's not legendary. Sometimes in Grim Dawn, epic items can just be straight up better than legendaries for some builds, so keep that in mind in the future. Every item in this set gives the exact stats and levels to skills that we need, and the helmet is where we're getting our pierce to cold damage conversion. The 3-piece set bonus gives us 3 levels to both of our main skills and gives us the Silver Mark ability that gives us extra damage on critical strike while reducing the enemy's cold resist by 15%. If you don't have all 3 pieces of this set, you can make replacements with really any piece of gear that you find that has the stats that you're looking for, but I think most of this build's power is going to come from this set, so you're going to want to make this a priority. The next important item is the Nightstalker pendant in the necklace slot. This item is relatively easy to get your hands on since you can purchase the blueprint for it once you reach revered status with the Cult of Bismiel, which isn't too hard to do. This necklace gives us the exact stats that we need and then plus 1 level of all skills in both of our classes, making it perfect for our build. It also gives a lot of extra crit damage to some of our abilities and adds some Frostburn, the Ring of Steel, which will be increasing our damage by quite a bit. Before getting my hands on the Nightstalker pendant, I had a mythical Frozen Core equipped, which is a decent replacement for being a really common epic item. The boot slot at the moment has mythical Wraithwalkers equipped, which is pretty important as a defensive layer for this build, but can be potentially upgraded with better gear later. Wraithwalkers gives us a little bit of cold damage, but the main thing it gives us is the Wraithwalk ability, which gives us a 30% chance to dodge and a 20% movement speed buff when we are hit for 5 seconds every 16 seconds. These boots have really helped me survive a lot more than I probably should be surviving, and it's a great option for this slot. Any rare or epic item with the stats that you're looking for will make an okay replacement for the boot slots. My pants slot currently has Mythical Death Whisper leggings equipped, which is a really good item for this build, but I can most likely do better in the future. It gives me all the stats that I need and even has an ability that deals a little bit of damage in an area when I'm hit. Before equipping these, I had on the epic Spellweave leg wraps that aren't nearly as good, but has kind of the same purpose that can probably get you through elite difficulty. In the belt slot, I have a White Lotus belt made with the blueprint that can also be bought with revered status from the Cult of Bismuel. This belt gives 0 offensive stats, but all of the defensive stats that it gives us, with some extra maximum resist, dodge chance, a lot of health, and the chance to heal when hit on a low cooldown, is the reason that we're using this. Any rare, epic, or legendary belt with the stats you're looking for can make do as a stepping stone or just a complete replacement, but I'm personally just a big fan of the White Lotus belt and all of the defenses it gives. It's another item that just lets me survive much more than I probably should be. The rest of the gear I have equipped at the moment are compromises that I have on right now until I can find better options, so everything that I talk about going forward is subject to change, and you may have better options available to you. So play around with these gear slots until you find something that you like or that works really well for you. In the glove slot, we have a Mythical Dawn Shard grip. The only thing that these gloves really do for me is add a 15 seconds duration to pneumatic burst, which is just a small little quality of life feature. There are many better options, 2 more obvious ones being the Chilling Grasp of Hagrid and Ice-Scorn Talons, giving much better stats and extra effects. In the ring slots, I have 2 common epic rings being the Bands of Black Ice equipped, which isn't the worst thing in the world since they both give decent cold damage and offensive ability, but there are some better options for sure. My goal with the ring slot is to get both of Alkimos' Touch of Anguish and the Touch of Dread rings to give us a better stats and its set bonus. The Alkimos rings can drop from the Lord Executioner at the end of the Steps of Torment dungeon, and you can theoretically farm them on Elite for the level 75 versions, then get the ultimate and farm them for the level 94 versions. But at the moment, the build just doesn't seem strong enough to beat the Steps of Torment in ultimate difficulty. In the metal slot, I have a Mythical Mark of Calamitous Desires, which gives a lot of elemental and damage over time bonuses, and quite a bit of offensive ability. This item is pretty decent, but I don't believe it's the best in slot item for this build. My goal is to maybe get a Mythical Mark of Dark Dreams that will help us get better stats and increased range of Veil of Shadow, which will make the build much stronger defensively and offensively. The relic slot is the biggest question mark for me right now. I'm really not able to find the relic that is perfect for this build. Right now I'm using the Bane relic, which gives some extra elemental damage, plus to all Inquisitor skills, and a little extra projectile attack on critical strikes. Before using Bane, I had the Death Chill relic on for the cold damage aura. My goal is to find the Nemesis relic blueprint and then switch to that and see if that works better for me. If not, I'll probably just be switching between these 3, seeing what my best damage can be. As for components and augments, the first priority is capping your resist, and once they are capped, you then have the option to use components for other extra effects. I'll list off some important components and augments that I use after my resists were capped. As mentioned before, I used a Chipped Claw in one of my weapons to unlock the Brutal Slam ability, which is our main single target attack. But in the other weapon, I have a Shard of Boronath that I'm mainly using for the auto attack replacer, but it also gives a nice extra damage. The blueprint for the Shard of Boronath component can be bought by a vendor that hangs out in the Ancient Grove dungeon next to the east of Ugnenbog. I have 2 Marks of Illusions in both rings, which are really good for some extra damage and energy regen. They also even give you a little bit of defensive ability, which helps us survive much better. This now brings us to the end of this build guide, and thank you all for watching if you did make it this far. If you do want to follow this build, this video will always be up for you, and I'm also going to be making a forum post with all of this information in a text forum for those of you who prefer that over watching a video for their information. That'll be down in the description once it's finished. It's not going to be finished right when I upload this video, but for those in the future, it'll be right there for you. Like I said, I've been having a lot of fun playing this build, and I think it will be very good for new players to try it out as well. I don't exactly know what like the DPS numbers you're expected to have during Ultimate and whatnot, but from like watching a few people's streams, it seems like around 500k-ish is a decent amount. It's not really something that's kind of widely known in Grim Dawn, and a lot of different builds will have different kind of DPS meters that they would want to reach and everything like that, depending on what content you're doing. But I think once this build gets all geared up, I really do feel like it will be able to do most, if not all, of the content in the game with how it's handling the content it's doing now. I feel like this build is at a really good spot right now. If I make any super drastic changes to it, I'm going to make an updated build guide in the future, but right now this build will be perfect for a lot of people that are starting out a new character in Grim Dawn, whether it be your first character, second, or third, or even maybe your 50th character. You just want to play kind of a cool ice build and you already have all of your items available with you. So I hope you guys have fun watching this video, and I hope you guys have fun if you do play this build. Let me know what you think in the comments. I did try a bit of a different editing style this video, and I myself am really happy with how I did with it. I am kind of learning the editing program that I'm using, so there are probably a few hiccups every now and then in the video, but I think for a build guide, this does work really well at conveying information. Let me guys know if you have any questions or anything like that. You can even come into my live stream, twitch.tv/SmattyMatty, whenever I am streaming. If you have any specific questions regarding the build or any questions just throw Grim Dawn in general. I'm not the most experienced Grim Dawn player, like I said, this is only my second level 100, but I think I have a understanding on a lot of the core mechanics, and I have a ton of experience in other action RPGs as well, so that may help. So like I said, thanks for watching. Sorry for the rambly conclusion here. I kind of went off script with this one. Just wanted to talk to you guys heart to heart, so I'll see you later.